Sometimes 50 looks damn good. That and This Week in Cloud Computing has a new sponsor here in just a few. Hey everybody, I'm your host Amanda Coulong. Welcome to the 50th episode of This Week in Cloud Computing. 50 already. I am so excited about this. We've got a lot for you on the show today. As you may notice, if you see behind me, we have a wonderful new sponsor, Xenos. We'll get into a discussion about them shortly, but welcome, Xenos. I have my wonderful co-host, Dave Linthicum, joining from Cloud Connect. You're always in a hotel room, Dave.
I know. The connection speed was too slow down on the floor, so I had to come up here. But it's great being at Cloud Connect and great being on the podcast.
Great. So we'll definitely be getting some insights from you about what's going on there. And we also have a wonderful 50th episode guest joining us today. We have David Lemphers, the Director of Cloud Computing at PricewaterhouseCoopers. So very happy to have you as well, Dave.
Thank you, Amanda.
There you are. Look at that press shot. Wonderful, wonderful shot of Dave right there. He wanted to have a talking mouth, you know, the moving mouth on his picture, but didn't have time to put that in. But we'll definitely get it next time, Dave. So speaking of chatting, if all of you would like to chat with us during today's episode, you can follow us on Twitter, TWI CloudComp, TweetCloudComp, and use the hashtag TWICC. You can also join us in the chat room itself, and also make sure you're going on to iTunes and YouTube and liking us there and interacting with us there as well. You can find This Week in Cloud Computing all over the place. So yes, make sure you saw that before. So there we go. But speaking of sponsors, let's talk a little bit more about sponsors now. Xenos is our wonderful new sponsor here on This Week in Cloud Computing. They're pretty cool. So Xenos is a next-generation cloud management solution, and it was designed to unify operations and assure that service levels are reached for large-scale organizations. So we've talked a lot about service-level agreements on this show. Data center operators use Xenos to manage their entire IT infrastructure wherever it's deployed, so whether it's physical, virtual, or in the cloud. It manages your networks, your servers, your virtual devices, storage, cloud infrastructure, pretty much gives you a holistic view of your entire IT environment so that you're better off in terms of your deployments. So in terms of some of their customers, Rackspace uses them, OpSourceHosting.com, all three of which just made Gartner's Magic Quadrant, by the way, and Autonomics, which was the first private government cloud. They all use Xenos. So if you've noticed on here, we have this really cool deal with them where just for This Week in Cloud Computing fans, if you download their ebook, it's called 5 Burning Questions Can You Really Manage the Cloud? If you download that ebook at www.xenos.com/cloud, then you could possibly win an iPad 2. So download the ebook. Hello, pretty easy. If you download the ebook, first off, it's got some great information in it, and you could be entered to win an iPad 2. So hats off to Xenos. Very happy to have you on This Week in Cloud Computing. So more about them later, but I think it's probably time to jump into some news headlines. So let's start off talking about Rackspace, who again is one of Xenos' customers. They've launched a Cloud Builder business line to support businesses who've deployed OpenStack. So this unit is going to be headed up by Jesse Andrews, who founded Anzo Labs, which is a company that Rackspace acquired, which provides services to enterprises and government organizations that work with OpenStack. So obviously to help customers with their OpenStack deployments. So what I'm wondering, guys, is will this move effectively assure companies considering an OpenStack deployment? So we've got, you know, some other major players that support OpenStack like Citrix and Dell and Microsoft. So, but will a move like this from Rackspace really help in terms of people who are using OpenStack? Let's start with Dave Linthicum.
Yeah, you got Dave and Dave. You got a tough one. You got a tough show, Amanda. I think it's a good move for them because ultimately OpenStack is being covered a lot in at this conference, and really the missing piece are the services that are needed to implement it and provide the value. And I think they saw this company that was working with NASA, working with some of the open source project as really someone who could take their customers into the OpenStack space. And typically in open source, that's going to be a difficult challenge. So by buying these guys, they got a profit center, they got a business user, they got a bunch of guys who are experts in OpenStack technology. They can bring their enterprise customers to OpenStack. And I think that's what they're looking for right now. This is a way to lubricate the movement of OpenStack into the cloud space as quickly as possible. And it's emerging quickly, so this is a good move by Rackspace.
All right, now I know that David Lemphers may have a few opinions on OpenStack himself, so what do you think about what Rackspace is doing?
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with Dave on that one, Amanda. I think the major challenge a lot of organizations have in adopting cloud technology is that they aren't completely trusting of, how possible is it to build a commercial cloud from what's available in the marketplace today? And secondly, what are some of the technical challenges that you need to solve from an engineering perspective so that you can actually have a credible, secure, reliable cloud? And I think anytime you have a real demonstration of the technology, such as Rackspace running their commercial cloud offering upon it, there's going to be a huge uptake and adoption just purely because someone can point to a real-life implementation and say, well, those guys are running it, so it must work.
Right.
And also the ability to produce some scale numbers and perf numbers, quality of service numbers, SLA numbers, as a baseline in which to measure against always helps people know, am I performing at the level of a Rackspace or am I performing better than the level of a Rackspace? So from a technology perspective, I think this is good. I think the acquisition of Ansel Labs, though, was a more strategic acquisition over and above their technical chops.
Okay.
Because I think one of the challenges many customers face today is more about how do I actually transform my business into a cloud business so that my business model aligns with the technology model. And I think having folks who've had to do that and have done some serious consulting, certainly in the federal, and kind of public space, is going to help these customers a great deal.
Great, great. Well, I'm curious to see what happens there for Jesse Andrews, and I would love to have him on the show at some point as well. This second story, I know you're both going to laugh at me, but IBM apparently is expected to generate $7 billion in cloud revenues by 2015, or so says CEO Sam Palmisano at the company's recent investor meeting. So, yeah, I know, everyone makes these forecasts and, puts out these big numbers. But what I want to know with this one is, are we experiencing just a teensy-weensy bit of hyperbole with this one, guys? Let me just throw one statistic out there, or one piece of research. Instat had actually said that by 2014, businesses in the U.S. will spend more than $13 billion on cloud computing. So even if this number is doubled for the international market, that means that IBM would be expecting to claim 25% of the market. Come on now. Dave Linthicum.
Yeah, if you look at the IDC numbers, they're way up too. So I guess IBM's looking at those and then figuring out the piece of the share. But I think this is throwing a lot of things into the cloud computing space that typically aren't considered cloud computing. So they're cloud washing a bit, and he's spinning a bit. And I've been a CEO before, and you have to basically become a cheerleader for the organization. I think he's doing that. They're going to make $7 billion in something, and chances are that something they're going to be able to kind of squint and look and say, yeah, it kind of looks like a cloud. And I think that's what he's talking about here, just to defend IBM a bit. That said, it's probably a little on the hype side, and it's probably a bet that I wouldn't make currently because the market is so new and it's still emerging, and it's still undetermined as to how it's going to emerge. But IBM has some good stuff, and they can certainly position themselves in the space. It's not going to be $7 billion, however.
All right, David Lemphers, what do you think?
So again, I think Dave hit on something really interesting, right? Is that a lot of folks in the enterprise space, and so to not bash up on IBM, if we add other folks like Oracle and those kind of folks, SAP into the mix, they are very interested in getting a slice of the very large potential market for cloud, and I think they tend to be gilding the lily, to some degree, and saying, hey, this thing that used to be called a mainframe or a kind of a cluster or some kind of enterprise DC equipment is now a cloud. I think is generally how they start to position that kind of forecast. I think if we use the standard kind of practice of it needs to be self-provisionable, it needs to be dynamically scalable, and it needs to be priced on some form of non-perpetual license or traditional license model, I think we'd find that their projections are a lot lower than that. And it's interesting that when you look at that Instat factoid, and you compare that to some of the research that IDC did just last year, they kind of they looked at the marketplace around 2009 as being kind of around 15 billion. They forecasted it to be in 2013 somewhere around 44 billion, and that's when you actually take. Yeah, so it's interesting, Amanda. I think this is where the numbers start to, and what, there's lies and there's damned lies and there's statistics, right? But if you look at the numbers that some of the folks are saying, I think Forrester generally think it's about 33 billion, somewhere around 2013. IDC are a little bit more bullish. They think it's going to be about 44 billion. Some feel that by kind of 2020 it's going to be in the trillions. And I think that the key to that is actually segmenting it out, right? And asking, first of all, are we talking about all clouds being equal, or are we talking about infrastructure as a service versus platform as a service versus SaaS? Because that changes the numbers dramatically, right? And then you also have to look at the relationship amongst those numbers as well, because there's a heavy dependency on PaaS providers downstream on infrastructure as a service providers, and then SaaS providers on PaaS providers. So I think that there's a lot of complexity in those numbers. And when I hear these CEOs of massive companies come out and say, we're going to make $7 billion, I tend to want to see a little bit more detail. And what do you mean by that?
And I want to see a very detailed infographic, too.
Exactly, right? When I suppose you want to understand is, are they talking about going after a particular vertical? Because if you looked at the report that came out of the Office of the CIO recently, they pegged $20 billion worth of IT budget being allocated for the cloud over the next couple of years. So, if IBM thinks that they could get $7 billion out of that $20 billion, I probably agree with them. But I'd also want to see some kind of run book or playbook as to how they're going to do that, because I'm not convinced that the conventional business model is going to make that kind of money in the cloud.
Yeah. I love these cases of pseudo cloud washing, but this one was also an investor meeting, so I can see why the big numbers were thrown out there. So I'll give them a little bit of some leeway there. Next story, everyone seems to be beating Apple and iTunes to the cloud. This time it's Google. So an article that I read about this one said, a stream come true. Ba-dum-bum. So according to a post in the XDA developers message board, a user named White Widows installed the Motorola Zoom Music app on his Android smartphone and checked the phone's sync settings and noticed that there was a sync music setting. So from his memory card, he was able to sync his entire music library with Google servers and then download all of those files onto a blank SD card. So here we have yet another service that is trumping Apple. Come on, Apple. What else will this be able to do? We'll be able to pull music directly from the cloud, share it. And what will happen if Apple doesn't move to the cloud? Dave Linthicum.
Yeah, it's a foregone conclusion that Google's going to provide music out of the cloud, and basically an iTunes in the cloud, for lack of a better way to describe it. And again, somebody else is beating Apple to the punch before they're able to get their servers up and running and get their systems up and running. However, I don't think Apple's in a huge hurry to move into the cloud for this particular service. They're just making too much money with iTunes and people who are downloading movies and music from their service. And moving in this direction is something that they're going to do, but I don't think it's a priority for them. There's just too much of a profit in their existing iTunes stack. Google's going to move in this space. We talked to a number of startups on this show, who provide very similar services. Apple does own some technology, but they bought it and shut it down. So the clear indication there is we don't know if we're going to make money in moving in that direction, and therefore we're going to take our time and our good time in moving in that direction and to assure that we can make money. So Steve Jobs is always a little smarter than I think we give him credit for, and I think he's waiting in the wings to launch something rather spectacular, and he doesn't care if other folks basically drive into the space before him.
Mm-hmm. Fair points. Dave Lemphers, what do you think? Does it make sense for them to go to the cloud when they're making all this money with iTunes?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think if you look at the nature of services like Last.fm and Pandora, I think they've tapped into the Uber trend of people wanting to use the cloud not just as a cold storage mechanism for assets like pictures and files. And I think music has a little bit more of a dynamic nature in that where you're playing the music makes a big difference as opposed to viewing a photo from Flickr. But I think if I was to be talking to folks like Google about what would a music service look like, I think providing storage for people's music files where they need to have some kind of smart client play those music files from the web, similar to a Last.fm Pandora experience where you actually control the music playlist rather than kind of being served up a produced list, I think is a huge value add. And then I think, here's why I think it's interesting as well, Amanda. I think anytime you can create an economy of scale around a commodity unit like a song, and you can control the way it's played and consumed without having to actually release the media in any capturable form, I think you're on a winner. And I think where they can actually offer a more expanded catalog than iTunes by actually controlling the DRM in the cloud and just streaming the bits down in a non-capturable format. They could also drop the price point. So, they could open up the target addressable market far more aggressively than iTunes just by virtue of the fact that if I only have to pay 5 cents for a song to listen to it for the month or whatever, versus owning
a nickel
it
for
$3.
a song. That harkens back to another old song a long time ago. Anyway.
But I think for the folks who get the power of the cloud from a business model transformation perspective, they're going to be looking to continually evolve the state of the art. And I think again, Last.fm and Pandora have really democratized music listening, but they do it in a kind of controlled random approach. I think if you can offer someone the control with the same basis of being able to say, hey, you can listen to it on your laptop, your mobile phone, in the car, and you don't have to worry about syncing the music and things like that. Exactly. Now you're onto a winner. So I think that's going to be interesting.
Dave Linthicum, you're holding your tongue. What are you thinking over there?
No, he's making some great points. I think the thing you have to remember with this is what they're probably going to offer is the ability, as we talk to the other startups, is to play your own music. So you own it. It's down on your hard drive. You upload it into a space in the cloud that's allocated for you, and you can basically stream it at any time. It's a little different than iTunes. iTunes kind of is there to provide you with content, so they're more of a content provider. I think Google is moving in that direction ultimately. They are going to move into providing content, but it's going to take a long time before they're able to stand something up that's as good as the Apple iTunes offering. It just takes a lot of money and a lot of resources to drive in that direction. So they're going to have ability to upload our own music and our own videos and all those sorts of things into the cloud, and that's going to be our portion of it. It's a little different market and it's a little different approach than the way Apple's doing it. We have to kind of keep that in mind.
Well, I have to throw this in there. Hopefully it'll become a paid thing, because I know that many people are a little bit frustrated with Google right now in terms of Google Apps and Gmail and having some downtime and lost messages. And I personally experienced it today where my account was down for an hour and someone said to me, well, it's free. You get what you pay for. So I'll gladly pay. I'll gladly pay if I have access to my things. So on that note, let's move along to Widgetbox. Widgetbox has rebranded itself as a cloud ad company called Flight, and they've raised $12 million. So at first blush, this one could be considered cloud washing, I'm sure, but is it? Because maybe this one's a sign of how the cloud is changing advertising. So Widgetbox, what they're doing now is creating almost like little mini web pages that can query to an API for some information. So you don't have to pay developers, weeks worth of pay to build ad units from scratch, and it provides for customized brand experiences and interactions. So you can include like videos and all sorts of little pieces in these experiences. So these tiny little cloud ads. Guys, what do you think? Is this cloud washing, or is there some substance to this? Dave Linthicum.
Yeah, and they're a cloud. I mean, they're leveraging the web. If you can call, websites and software as a service apps and platforms as a service apps, they have aspects of that, and I have no issue with them, calling themselves a cloud. You provide a service that comes out of the internet. This is probably a little bit cloud washing in that when the VC pumped money into them, they said, you're a cloud company. Please say you're a cloud company because you're worth more as a cloud company. And that's the way they're driving up. And everybody kind of gets that now. They understand they have to position themselves in the space to provide more value. As long as they don't get a little silly about it, and we saw a lot of silliness on the show for over the last year, I'm okay with it. These guys look like they have a good product in the market. It solves a niche issue, comes out of the internet, certainly has a pattern that looks like cloud computing. Go ahead and call yourself cloud computing, and congratulations on the $12 million that a VC firm gave you. Godspeed.
Yeah, exactly. Money's always a good thing these days. So Dave Lemphers, Widgetbox, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's tough anytime a player that has been in the kind of traditional space, suddenly turns around and says, "Yep, now we're doing cloud." And
sure.
I think a lot of people, and per the article, right, rolling their eyes because everyone's saying so. But I think I like to err on the side of inspiration and think that perhaps Widgetbox saw an opportunity to take some part of their capability and re-roll it as a new offering. And I think, again, not knowing too much about what they're actually talking about or why they were able to raise $12 million. And again, also putting that in perspective as a frame of reference, $12 million isn't a lot of money as well for
really.
cloud companies that are looking to do kind of after first round funding. But I think what's more interesting about this is, again, back to the IBM issue, is where do they think they're going to make their money? Because if you're a fast follower or you're trying to innovate on the Me Too, I just don't know that there's a ton of money in that.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly serving up things that require eyeballs in today's cloud market is not a sound strategy. And so if what they're actually providing is some kind of platform for the consumption of advertising assets that could be embedded into multimedia applications from music to data, then I'm more interested. And I think that's an area, and again, I'm just going to throw my own thoughts on the matter, if I was kind of talking to Widgetbox. But I think that, if they were really focusing on where the largest amount of channel demand is going to come from, it's going to come from data and the movement of data. So if they had some interesting way to tag data movements with some kind of advertising information, and think about it just like an IP datagram, right? If you were able to insert some form of pre or post advertising into the stream of data that moves around the cloud, then you've got something that's pretty monetizable. But I think if all you're doing is saying, "Oh, here we've innovated on the existing paradigm of an image, so that now you can do more with the image," then I don't know. I don't see it.
We're not a widget company anymore. We are a cloud-based advertising company. Anyway.
That's all widgets.
Well, I'm curious now, since we do have Dave Linthicum at the Cloud Connect conference, I want to make sure that he's not just walking the halls, but actually doing his homework for us. So, Dave Linthicum, what are you seeing at Cloud Connect?
Yeah, Cloud Connect's a great show. I mean, I like this show probably better than the other cloud shows, that are around right now, and not just because we had the director on the show a while ago. What was interesting to me and interesting to a lot of the attendees, there wasn't a lot of announcements that was here. There wasn't the big, we're in the cloud, by the way, or by the way, we're in the cloud, all the things we saw last year. There wasn't a lot of cloud washing, wasn't a lot of hyperbole. Everybody seems to be getting down to work. The keynotes were a little salesy, but there were some great gems there. For example, we got to understand how eBay builds their cloud and how they leverage cloud computing technology to automate their world. And they have a unique problem because they can't use Amazon because Amazon's a competitor of theirs. So they have to use other cloud products. And it was very good to see the architecture, good to see the results. So it was a lot of parade of solutions or people that are actually doing things with private, public, hybrid clouds that came through in the keynotes. Intel announced Intel Expressway, Cloud Access 360. I think that was a great announcement. OpenStack, we already talked about that. That was discussed a lot at the event. Open source is a big deal in cloud. Everybody's behind OpenStack, as it seems, probably more so than I thought before I came to the conference. There also was announced, and actually there's a party tonight around the general availability of Nimbula Director, which is a hybrid cloud. If you remember, Nimbula was a bunch of guys from Amazon who started a company that provide a cloud computing operating system that runs between on-premise systems and public cloud. So it's very neat from an architectural perspective, very innovative technology. technology. They just didn't really have a product yet other than a demo. Well, now they have a product, so it gets interesting from here on in. So I'm looking forward to going by and seeing those guys tonight, looking at the product firsthand. The other thing, as a data point, I found out that 20% of Kung Fu Panda 2 was rendered in the cloud. I think that's a great.
That's
of course,
pretty
the
cool.
question is, that came from one of the other analysts I was speaking with. What about the other 80%? If 20% worked, I don't want you to do the other 80.
Yeah, really.
The expo was huge. The panel content was very good. People got down into the weeds, which wasn't there last year. Everybody got into what it means to do a cloud, the bits and bytes behind it, more focus on fundamentals such as architecture, and the basics are returning to the cloud. So as I'm sure our guests will agree with, the success into the cloud is putting the right talent in place and the right processes and people in place to get you there. And that was a huge focus. And I didn't get that last year, and it was rather frustrating. And everybody's returned to that. They understand that that's a pattern of success. Not as much hype as I mentioned earlier. And the panel that I did on virtualization versus private cloud computing, and I sat on there with Randy Bias, who's the cloud strategist at Cloud Scaling, James Waters, VMware, Lou Tucker, who's with Cisco, and Christopher Brown, who's the CTO of OpsCode, and he's formerly with Amazon. And we had a great discussion around the architectural patterns and the difference between virtualization and private cloud computing. And there is a difference in terms of virtualization being enabling technology and private cloud computing be kind of an architectural pattern. I don't mean to get overly geeky here, but people are understanding. Yeah, that's true. My little propeller is spinning wildly right now. But people are starting to see the difference, and it's. I mean, my heart was filled with joy today when that came about. People are seeing the light in terms of what it takes to build this stuff. We're seeing winning case studies, people that are leveraging cloud computing. We're seeing huge ROI in the space, and looking forward to the open bar that starts at 7 p.m.
Yeah, I think out of that whole discussion, I heard justification for going to the open bar.
Hey, you know what? I got to look at the products, and I can't look at the products unless I have a martini in my hand.
Got to look at them through beer goggles. Dave Lemphers, would you agree with me on that one? Do you have any questions for Dave Linthicum and about Cloud Connect?
No, we had a couple of folks down there, and certainly I think, from what I was hearing from them was that there's certainly a maturity that's starting to come out of the cloud community, and it's certainly something that we're feeling, as we kind of speak to different providers and adopters, and I work very closely with Jim Curry and the OpenStack guys, and I'm very passionate about what they're doing, and I think for us, I think a large part of the evolution of our cloud marketplace will be more of those larger players moving in, and I suppose it'll be interesting, if we start to see a lot of the open source community backed by large commercial players. It's going to be kind of the whole Red Hat Linux journey all over again.
Definitely, definitely. Well, I think we might as well get some umbrellas out for the 50th anniversary because it's getting cloudy.
Shield Maiden.
Yes?
Ragnarok is upon us once again.
What's that?
Oh, never mind. Just go with it.
Okay.
Storm on demand. Storm on demand. Storm on demand is an infrastructure as a service, more cloud computing platform that is powerful enough to replace dedicated servers. A proprietary cloud platform designed by Liquid Web, one of the largest web hosting providers with over 12 years of experience. It is easier to use and less expensive than Amazon EC2. Features include server setup in minutes, easy scaling, backup and restoration capabilities, and pay-as-you-go utility-style billing. Options include cPanel, Fantastico, Ubuntu, Debian, CentOS, fully managed servers, private networking, and swords like this, and little guys that we do not have in this commercial, but it doesn't matter, because this is cooler. Storm On Demand can be found at stormondemand.com, at Storm On Demand. Ragnarok be damned. Storm On Demand. If you do not get Storm On Demand, I will come to your house with my sword and make you get it.
What what's up with all the balloons? Oh, it's our 50th episode, of course. So if you want a little Storm on Demand man, make sure you tweet at TWI Cloud Comp and say, I want a Storm on Demand man, at Storm on Demand on Twitter, one of our wonderful sponsors. And also, Xenos. See, look how lovely this is. We have this whole new look for the 50th episode, and it's going to continue on. So, Dave, have you downloaded the ebook yet?
No, but I will directly after this podcast.
I'm going to check and make sure that you did. Although you don't qualify to get the iPad 2, of course. You and I are exempt from that. We don't get it.
What?
No, because we want to make sure that all of our viewers get the good stuff.
Oh, I got to buy mine again? Jeez.
Yes.
All right. I'll download it anyway.
All right. So all of you, make sure that you're entering into this to win potentially an iPad 2 from Xenos. But that ebook's really cool. It's Can You Really Manage the Cloud? 5 Burning Questions. That alone makes me want to download it. I'm going to do it right now, actually. And by the way, James Hicks, thank you for the shout out. James is writing to us on the wall in here saying, happy 50th episode. So let's jump in now to a discussion with Dave Lemphers. So Dave, you're the Director of Cloud Computing for PricewaterhouseCoopers, but you've also worked for another small company in the past too, building something called, Windows Azure. Am I right with this?
You are.
I like
a small little garage company out of Seattle.
Yeah, just tiny little startup. You know, that's how it works. But let's get down to business. So yes, you formerly worked at Microsoft as one of the principal engineers, I believe, to help develop Windows Azure. So what was that like? Let's start there a little bit with your past. You know, what did you like about Azure, and actually what would you possibly change?
So I think what I liked about it was that it was a very organic startup culture, even though it was in, a very large organization like Microsoft. And so, there was this wonderful opportunity to innovate and try new things just because no one had really, worked in that space. And, at the time, this was 2008 when we started the project, there were a couple of strong, infrastructure as a service players, obviously Amazon being the biggest one, but no one had really stepped into that area of platform as a service. And so I think, having to force ourselves to think technically about what that looks like, while at the same time building an infrastructure as a service platform to support that was just exactly what a geek and a computer scientist needed. But I also think that there's some rigor and discipline that I learned as an engineer at Microsoft that I think was the benefit of almost 30 years of solid engineering. And there used to be this joke, Amanda, where people always say, Microsoft product sucks and blah, blah, blah. But, if you knew what it took to even just build Windows, and I'm not talking build as in construct, I mean actually run the build system to produce the running executable. It's an absolute miracle that the thing actually can build. So I think people forget about the complexity of building large-scale global software, and so that was a very special time for me. And I think if I could have changed anything, I think it would have been that we were a little bit more bullish about our position, and I think we were fairly new in the marketplace, so we were a little bit gun shy about going out and making statements about where we thought PaaS was going to be and where we saw the transformation for our customers. And I think if we could do it differently, I think we would have been a little bit more outspoken and really got behind that message and pointed out to the stand. So, but what can you do?
Exactly. Do you think that Azure has a chance? I mean, they've got some really great large-scale implementations so far. They've won a lot of the big government-type contracts and whatnot. Are you confident that there's going to be a place for Azure?
Yeah, I have, and look, obviously I'm biased, but
right.
But when I try and look at it objectively, I think that when you look at the market demand and you look at the percentage of organizations that are going to require, and we used to have a graph, Amanda, that would kind of talk about the different types of use cases, right, for cloud computing. And when you look at those extremely fixed, scripted style environments like App Engine, and when you look at the extremely open but yet unmanaged environments of Amazon, there's an area in the middle for people who don't have necessarily infrastructure skills, or they want a little bit more flexibility at the application level.
Sure.
I think that's exactly the sweet spot for PaaS. And when I look at the marketplace today, not many people have the developer ecosystem, the development tools and platform experience, or the sheer investment in actual assets that Microsoft have. Mm-hmm. And they've done a really good job in actually building a V1 product. Okay. They've got some smart people working there as well, guys like Yusuf Khalidi and Mark Rusovic. So I think they've got some really smart folks with demonstrated experience in kind of building big, innovative platforms. So I think they're going to be in good hands.
Okay. Well, enough about Microsoft because, we've moved on from that. You and I had the chance of meeting at the SoCal Bio Cloud Computing Conference here in LA recently. And one of the things that struck me there is you said that rapid innovation is imperative. Can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that I face in my day-to-day job, Amanda, is that I walk into an organization and they're very fixed on this need to move to cloud computing, but they honestly see it as a kind of thing that they can do as a side project, or they can spin up a tiger team to go and attack it on the weekend.
Right.
And I tend to kind of explain this in the model of there's an incremental evolutionary step that most organizations can take when it comes to technology adoption. And the example I always use are printers, right? We're upgrading our printers because we're going from black and white to color, and we're going from 24 pages a minute to 40. And that's an incremental evolutionary step. You're doing better on the previous application of the technology. When you look at a marketplace like cloud computing, it's matured at a quicker cycle. So if for the purpose of our conversation, let's say it's maturing every second cycle. So already you're going to be one cycle behind the marketplace maturity cycle of the actual paradigm like cloud computing. Mobility and data are very similar. And so I always say to customers that, if you really want to get into that space, you actually have to look at complete innovation. You need to completely innovate what it is that you provide, how you provide it, who you provide it to, and how do they pay for it.
Very
and I think that's something that a lot of organizations are struggling with today because they see cloud computing and they see it as the technology of virtualization and automation. And they don't necessarily see it as a way of creating new revenue streams, optimizing their cost structures, or changing their marketing mix.
Right, that's actually a very fair point, rather than just efficiency and saving money and whatnot, actually creating brand new revenue streams.
And exactly, when you look at let's for argument's sake say it's a $33 billion opportunity.
Now you're throwing a number out there. Uh-oh.
I'm extrapolating between IDC and Forrester.
On average, between all of the analyst houses.
I'm creating a median out of make-believe numbers, but if we say that it's somewhere in the order of that magnitude, and then you look at traditional the professional services market, where it might be like a $2 billion marketplace, I think a lot of these organizations really think about is it worth me spending money or investing in cloud technology so that I can save potentially 10% cost? Or am I better off looking at refactoring my business model so I might actually add an extra $5 or $6 million worth of revenue? And,
sure.
And I think that's the critical question, right? Is when you have such a large target addressable market that is dwarfs your existing target addressable market, is cost really the area you want to invest in?
Right.
Because if I spend if I spend $1 trying to reduce my costs in cloud versus spending $1 in increasing my market share, I would rather move towards a very brand new target addressable market such as cloud, where there aren't any real established competitors.
Right.
I mean, even look at what's Amazon making right now? Maybe $2 billion, something like that. So
who knows?
Still, it's a tiny percent, right? So.
Very fair point. Let's jump into a little bit of a discussion around OpenStack, because I know that PWC has, an interesting take on OpenStack. What are your thoughts with it specifically?
So again, I think, from an OpenStack perspective, anytime you have a large organization like Rackspace that have demonstrated capabilities and run rate, around cloud, when they open source their technology, it's a huge benefit for the industry for a number of reasons. The first one is they've already got a lot of the lessons learned and best practices to get up to speed. So if I need, and coming from a background of engineering a cloud, it's very complicated. Everything from the actual host that you run your application in, to the fabric that needs to support the management and monitoring of that, to finding out the way to meter those resources if you need to charge it back or bill it to somebody.
Right.
Doing patch management, both in-premise security and border security. These are very complicated technology undertakings, especially when you're doing it at a distributed scale.
Right.
And so I think any time those problems are solved by a very credible source, it's a great boon for the community. But I also think that when you look at the conversation right now with a lot of organizations who are looking for parity between their internal cloud investments and their public cloud investments, having that seamless parity to essentially dial up your service across your internal OpenStack cloud and your public Rackspace cloud, which is running on the same platform, now you've got an extra added benefit that a lot of organizations really can't attest to. So,
sure.
Again, when I look at that relationship between what OpenStack represents to Rackspace and what that means to customers running private clouds or hybrid environments, it becomes extremely differentiating.
All right. Now, one thing that Dave Linthicum and I talk about a lot on this show is who's being acquired and, mergers and all these things in the cloud. Who do you think is going to be acquired next, Dave?
So that's a tough question for me to answer purely because I work for a restricted SEC company.
Speculate.
Let me talk in abstract. So here's what I think. I think there's a lot of companies out there today, and we saw it with IBM, right? Who are putting a stake in the ground and saying, we're going for a lion's share of the cloud market, and we're going to do it on the back of what we've done for the last kind of 5 to 10 years in client server. I think what they're going to find, though, is that the complexity of building up both the DNA but also the kind of technical assets required to be successful in that marketplace is actually a lot tougher than they first envisaged.
Sure.
So I think what's going to happen is that these guys are actually going to go out and acquire a bunch of smaller companies that have niche experience in a particular area. So billing, for example. Billing is a fairly complicated task in a cloud environment. And I think these kind of companies are going to have to go and find that DNA. They may actually have to scrap the technology completely because it just isn't a good architectural or platform fit for what they're building. And what I mean by that is, if the company's built it in Java, and they need to try somehow integrate it into their C++ platform, that just becomes a difficult engineering task. But what becomes interesting is what you're buying is the lesson learned and the muscle that these companies have developed by having to build something like that in a distributed space. And I think what you'll find is the new generation of acquisitions will be these very large companies buying the brains and the arms and legs off these very smart, smaller companies, trashing the technology and just bringing in the DNA.
So just the brains, arms, and legs and not the mouths?
Yeah, no, they don't have mouths anyway.
Ears.
So it's I say that to answer your question, Amanda, because I think it fundamentally challenges the traditional assumptions around mergers and acquisitions that you are acquiring some form of capital asset as well as IP and human assets.
Right.
I think for a lot of the companies that I talk to, they're less interested in those capital assets and they're more interested in the human assets and the IP. So,
Sure. Well, they should acquire a bunch of little men, just like the Storm on Demand man. Anyway, I digress. Dave Linthicum, do you have some questions for Dave Lemphers?
Yeah, it's great to talk to somebody else who's out there battling this, battling the clouds, and not battling the clouds, but trying to get people implemented on cloud computing. So what are the largest impediments that your clients are seeing today as they move into the cloud, and how are you addressing those impediments?
Yeah, I kind of segment that that area into two parts, Dave. I think the first one is that they're struggling greatly understanding the technology platform, and they traditionally they have a good sense for what virtualization is, and they kind of understand the concept of automation. But what they don't really understand is how much or how little do I actually have to invest to get a fully up and running cloud? And I think that has been somewhat skewed by the large players because they invest multi-billion-dollar investments in their cloud infrastructure. And for a small organization looking to retire their basement iron, that can be a little bit of a daunting undertaking. The second part is the migration. They sometimes are wondering, well, what can I actually move to the cloud? And how is there a framework or is there a decision model that I can use that helps me understand that, I should move this and I shouldn't move that? I might not move this because of regulatory issues, or I might move that because of cost issues. And so they're struggling to actually, once they decide to go to cloud, make a decision to move there. And then fundamentally, they're having trouble selling it up the line. Generally, it's the kind of the dev guys who are like playing with this technology. They go up to the kind of enterprise architect, CIO level, and the first question they ask is, well, what's the business benefit here? What's the business value that I can communicate up to the stakeholders that they'll sign a check? And so I think there's a big gap between the folks who are playing with the technology and saying, wow, this is pretty cool, to the folks who are actually saying, well, if we're going to make an investment in this, we need to understand what that business value looks like.
Understand. So it came up today, service-oriented architecture came up today as a preferred pattern, architectural pattern in moving to cloud computing. So how are your clients leveraging SOA to move to cloud, or are they leveraging SOA to move to cloud?
That's such a great question, Dave. I think one of the biggest challenges organizations are facing at the moment at an enterprise architecture level is they aren't able to clearly map a on-premise architecture to a cloud platform. And what I mean by that is things like persistence, for example, is something that is inherent in a lot of enterprise architectures because they've had access to extremely fast, low latency, highly available data storage. And suddenly they move to an environment where it might be high latency, low performant, kind of data storage, or they may be moving from a structured data model, and out to the cloud to an unstructured data model. So they're looking for transformation patterns that help them say, okay, this is what the enterprise architecture always looked like when we did singleton, and now we're moving to the cloud, and it has to become distributed. And then the other aspect is just the mere, software development lifecycle and the application lifecycle management processes around, how do you actually build, deploy, monitor, and then manage your cloud services now that they live in someone else's infrastructure and you don't have all of the monitoring that you had before. So you're partially flying blind. So yeah, and I think SOA, SOA is an interesting problem because that was sold to a lot of these enterprises as a mechanism for supporting interoperability and high composition of applications. And I think it didn't really deliver on that. And so I think if you take something that had problems in on-premise and try and fix it in the cloud, you're going to struggle there as well.
Yeah, the final question was, what's the best way for enterprises to attract and cultivate cloud computing talent? There seems to be a huge gap between the number of people, the number of organizations that are looking for cloud computing experts in the positions that are open, and actual experts to fill those positions.
Yeah, that's a massive problem at the moment, and I can definitely echo that sentiment that a lot of the and I'm not just talking about enterprises who are consuming cloud computing. I'm also talking about enterprises who are building cloud computing technologies. The biggest challenge is that it's such a small community of honest practitioners, people that actually have demonstrated experience at a certain scale. And more times than not, they really enjoy the place they work at, and they're looked after very well. So it's very hard for a very traditional, conventional business like a bank to attract that kind of talent when that talent's already working for a Google or a Microsoft or an Amazon. So I think the key lies in, this magic word, which is transformation, is that if you want to attract the top talent in cloud computing, but you aren't bona fide transforming into a cloud computing organization, you're always going to have that misalignment. And so if these organizations want to attract that talent, they have to get pretty honest with themselves about, are we really becoming a cloud computing company? Do we really believe in the paradigm shift? And I always use the example of like how many folks made the jump from mainframe to client server. It's the same, corollary. How many folks are really going to move from client server to cloud? And I think you'll see folks who are really blazing a trail of saying, yep, we're dumping the old and we're going for the new, even if we're doing well and we're successful. And sometimes, arguably, that's the hardest time to change. But they see that, it's a larger market and a new horizon, and they're making the necessary steps. There's others that are kind of a little bit more reluctant, and unfortunately, they're not going to be able to attract top talent, and likewise, they're not going to be able to convince the market that they're making the move.
Awesome. Back to you, Amanda.
Well, I think that was a good wrap-up. Dave, is there anything else that you have on your end from the Cloud Connect conference? I think you're ready to go get that cocktail from the looks of it.
Yeah, it's a great conference. It's a great space to be in. I can't imagine doing anything else in my career right now than following the cloud computing space because it's more quick-moving, innovative, and emerging than anything else I've been involved with in my career. So I just get pumped about all the things that we talk about on this podcast. So I am going to have that drink, and I'm going to be proud to have that drink, Amanda.
Well, cheers to us for our 50th episode. So cheers with my coffee mug and my little man.
My coffee mug,
and
too.
Xenos. And Dave Lemphers, thank you so much for putting up with me yet again. It was wonderful having you on the show, and hopefully you will be back again.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Dave, and again, congratulations on a wonderful 50th episode.
Excellent. Well, it was wonderful having you as a part of it. So that about wraps things up for today. There are the balloons again. Oh, and if you think you're off the hook, you're not. Make sure you go to xenos.com/cloud and download that ebook. Download it because you could get an iPad too. Very, very easy. There you go, right there, see? And also follow and subscribe, tweet CloudComp on Twitter, and use the hashtag TWICC. So also thanks to Storm On Demand at Storm On Demand, our hosting provider here at This Weekend. Could not be doing this without you. And if you would like to sponsor the show, send an email to sponsor@thisweekend.com or Mo, that's M-O, @thisweekend.com. Ideas for the show, send them to yours truly, Amanda@thisweekend.com. And you can always hit me up on Twitter too, that's @akulong. So be sure to join us again next week, same cloud time, same cloud channel. I am your host, Amanda Kulong. Thank you yet again for watching This Week in Cloud Computing.